There's no voice.
مرحبا. لا هو انا قاعد اهو مستني بتاعه. قاعد مستني الروبوت بتاعه.
هتخلصوا تروح يعني ولا مش تروح؟
الله اعلم الحمد الساعه كام اصلا.
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. It's now 10:30, the time to start our session today. So today we are privileged to have our speakers, who is Dr. Paul Kachaprula. He's the head of department from the head of department for plant science at the University of Zambia. So I welcome you, Dr. Kachapula. You can start and maybe say a few words about yourself before you start.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Mfungwe, for that introduction. Like Dr. Mfungwe has said, my name is Paul Kachapula, and welcome again, participants, to this training on modern concepts in plant disease and pest management for AARDO countries. Specifically today, we will be focusing on the plant disease portion of it, looking at newer or modern ways that we can use to try and deal with this issue of plant diseases. My name is Paul Kachapula again. I have a plant pathology PhD degree from the University of Arizona, and I'm currently a lecturer and consultant and researcher, as well as the head of department for the Department of Plant Sciences. So just as a quick reminder, you do all remember that on day one, we focused on insect pests. We had fruitful deliberations on that day, and then the second module was on the role of plant breeding in plant disease and pest management. That was yesterday. That was also a very fruitful discourse. So today, like I said, we will focus more on plant diseases. So what are plant diseases? So this, anybody who's been in agriculture at one point or another, you have seen strange things happening on your crop. And part of that is plant diseases. And the plant disease is simply a condition involving, you know, abnormal changes in your crop, whether it is form, behavior, physiology, or integrity. And at the bottom are some examples. To your left, where my cursor is, that's a gray leaf spot on maize, or some would call corn. And that's caused by a fungus. So that's a disease. Just below that, you have what is supposed to be banana plants, but they are not big, growing, you know, tall like they should be, because they have banana bunchy top virus. So this is caused by a viral disease caused by a virus. So you can see there's an abnormality there. In the middle, where you have these 5 tomato fruits, you can see that they have been damaged by lead blight. And this is caused by another fungus, Phytophthora infestans. To your right, you have some healthy potato plants, but you also have a potato plant there that is wilting. This is caused by a bacteria, Ralstonia solanacearum. And at the bottom is what you see at the bottom should have been it should have been cassava tubers, but these have you know, cassava brown streak disease. So plant disease can affect any part of the plant, leaves, stems, the entire plant, fruits, roots, and everything. So the end result is that you have unproductive crop, and you have losses. If you have people that were employed to do this, they lose their jobs, and so on. And therefore, it's very important to control plant diseases. So, like I said, on a global level, just losses attributable to plant diseases, they are in excess of $200 billion. And of all crops that are lost worldwide, 14% of that crop is as a result of plant diseases. And 14% seems like a lower percentage. It's a very high one, but it's because it's on a global scale. If we zero it only to the developing world, which is where most of the AARDO countries belong, you will notice that it goes as high as 30% of all the losses being caused by plant diseases. 30% of the crop is being lost because of plant diseases. So this loss can be in many forms. What you see in on your left here is an Irish potato. Obviously, that entire potato is gone. Nobody is going to cook that because the whole of it is lost. If you have a lot more like that, it means a huge quantity of your produce is lost, which is bad news. There is also what I've put in the middle called what we call mycotoxins. This is something that is also caused by microbes. Unfortunately, it's only recent that in developing countries, including AARDO countries, it's only recent that we are beginning to pay very close attention to this. We have aflatoxins, we have fumonisins, zearalenines, all sorts of mycotoxins. The developed world, where standards and regulations are much more strict, they periodically check their crop to make sure these mycotoxins are not there. But from the developing world, slowly we are picking up. But this is also an issue that is caused by microbes. And the problem even is that once you have these mycotoxins in your crop, you will even fail to export to those markets. If, for example, you have groundnuts or peanuts and you're trying to sell them to Europe, you will notice that the price is very good there. But because it's a sensitive market, they will test your peanuts or your groundnuts. If they find mycotoxins, they are going to reject your entire consignment. So that's a huge loss. So on the far right, what you see is an apple. Some people might pick this apple and eat and everything is okay. But in some supermarkets, sensitive ones, if you are a farmer trying to supply apples looking like this, the supermarket might tell you this is not good for our standards. So they will reject your consignment. And therefore, you can see that this is not an issue of quantity, but this is quality, because you have your big, nice apple, but because of these blemishes, you cannot, supply them to the supermarket. So several, of course, even in apples, you have quantity loss and, toxins sometimes can show up. But in addition to these, you have now various attempts that growers spend trying to control these diseases. And one of the things, unfortunately, that many growers tend to run quickly to is pesticides. They immediately start buying huge volumes of pesticides, those who can afford. Sometimes there's government programs that buy these pesticides for small-scale farmers, those who cannot afford. But still, there's a huge, quantities of dollars that are spent on this annually. And so all this has necessitated the need to control plant diseases. Like I said, I gave examples of fungal diseases, bacterial diseases, and virus diseases. We will discuss nematode in the module that is going to be there tomorrow. So what is a pathogen? It's simply typically a microorganism that causes disease on the plant. All those symptoms I showed you. And those are by no means, if I go back just a little bit, these are by no means exhaustive. There is a lot and lot more. I agree, a lot of you who are in this training, especially those that are in crop protection, or even just those who are in practicing agriculture in general, you agree with me that there's lots and lots of diseases. Moderator, could you help me mute some people? Yes, you will agree with me that these are just very few. There is hundreds upon hundreds of diseases affecting different crops. Almost all crops, maybe not say almost, all crops will have one disease or another. Okay, so, but these are the major, and there are a few other pathogen groups that I have not included here, but these are the major ones. Okay, so now, because of all that, the threats that these plant diseases cause to people. Just to recap them again, quality losses, yield losses, those heavy investments in pesticides, but also jobs that are tied to this. Most of the countries, especially many AARDO member countries or the developing countries, huge proportions of these countries, they are employed in the agricultural sector. So it means that if the crop doesn't do very well, jobs are lost. So because of that, there is, disease management is a very, very big issue that everybody must take seriously. Now, there are 4 major categories or groups or scenarios where plant diseases have been controlled. The first scenario is what I've referred to, the use of synthetic pesticides. This is what, of course, you have fungicides, you have nematicides, and so on. Now, unfortunately, this is one of the groups that many people like to run to. Unfortunately, just like with human health, people don't like to do preventative lifestyles. They like to wait until the disease shows up and then they go looking for paracetamol or ibuprofen. Unfortunately, synthetic pesticides is almost like a default setting for many people, and it has been for a long time. But it changed a little bit, and I'll explain why. And most of us probably know, and we did hear from the first speaker who spoke about management of insect pests. But then following that change, the new move that came in was, okay, with all these bad effects of pesticides, which I'll shortly mention, maybe it's better to do integrated disease management so that we try to improve on our efficiency with which we are dealing with the diseases, also so that we minimize the harm on the environment and so on, and several other benefits. And I will go and explain that and the new things that are available in that integrated disease management. Then we've probably, most of us have probably heard about organic agriculture or organic farming. That has its own requirements. If you're going to produce an organic crop, that has its requirements, and you have to manage the pests in a certain way, which is consistent with the principles of organic agriculture. So I'll explain that a little bit. And then the other scenario, which is closely related to organic agriculture, is what is called agroecological crop production. And I will introduce this, I'll explain what it is and how the unique issues for disease management in that scenario. Okay, so let's start with the synthetic pesticides. And this you probably heard several times. So you have the number 1 here. I hope you can see my cursor. Dr. Mfungu, are you able to see my cursor when I move it around?
Yes, it's very clear.
Okay, thank you very much. So you have number 1 here, number 2, and number 3. So this is a scenario of you have your garden or you have your farm, and you are spraying pesticides in this farm to control pests and diseases. Several things could happen. Some of that pesticide could volatilize into the air, contaminating the air. If you have, even the person who's spraying this pesticide in here might end up inhaling this pesticide if he is not wearing personal protective equipment, and that, ends up affecting their health, okay? Some of the pesticide, as you spray it, it ends up into the soil. Of course, sometimes your target is to try to deal with the pests that are attacking your roots and tubers and potato stems and so on. Now, but that pesticide might end up, some of the pesticides, especially the very persistent organic pollutants, they stay in the soil for some time. And any microbe that is in that soil, of course, it ends up being negatively affected. Okay? It could also be that the pesticide leaches and gets into groundwater. And this groundwater also sometimes we drill boreholes, and you might end up, drilling water which is contaminated with pesticides. And some of these pesticides might end up into water bodies where they affect several other things. We have lots of marine species. We have fish, we have mammals, we have all sorts in there. And all those are affected. Now, on the human side, once this pesticide has gotten into your system, either through the food, or by the way, I left one more thing. As you spray the pesticide here, sometimes you're spraying on an apple which is almost ready for harvesting, or a tomato which is almost ready for harvesting. When you do such a thing on a crop like that, and then you don't observe harvest intervals, that is the period that you must wait for the chemical to break down before you harvest the tomatoes to take to the market. The person who eats that tomato or apple when they buy it from the market, it's going to have a lot of these pesticide residues. Anyway, the end result is this. Some pesticides are carcinogenic. You could have several cancers showing up, okay? Some have all sorts of toxic things in the cytoplasm of a plant. Some of them bind the DNA, they are genotoxic, and in the end, they might end up affecting, causing cancer, carcinogens, through binding of DNA. They might affect your immune system. Some will affect your respiratory system. I'm sure if anybody in here has been in a situation where you were applying a pesticide and you accidentally inhaled it, I'm sure many of you remember, struggling to breathe. They can affect your reproduction, your cardiovascular system, and the nervous system. There is people that, if you look at some young men that have spent a lot of time applying pesticides as a job from one farm to another or one company to another, you will notice that they reach a level where they have uncontrollable shaking of the hand. That's the problem with chronic exposure or acute exposure to some of these pesticides. So when all this was happening, people were have been observing over time, and they've said, look, these contaminated groundwater, they contaminate food, they are not good, they are harmful to humans, and they have non-target effects. You do appreciate that nature has got multiple living things and multiple systems. And each of those, they are interrelated and help each other. I'll pick an example of bees. Bees and other pollinators like butterfly, we need them. If today you lost all the bees and the butterflies, you would have serious hunger globally because there'll be no pollination. Your rice will not give you grain. Your maize will not give you grain because, pollination. These are agents of pollination. But there's a lot more non-target effects. You might be spraying a fungicide to try to control a disease, but that fungicide might also be killing a bee. It might be killing butterflies and other pollinators. It might be killing some microbes in the soil that are needed maybe for nitrogen fixation or something. So that is really an issue. So, and of course, I have already spoken about the costs of these pesticides. Now, there is another issue called bioaccumulation, and this one was mentioned to you already for those that attended the first module. Not only do you have some of these pesticides entering into, maybe finding themselves into water, but they end up in all the organisms that are in the water. For example, the fishes that eat those organisms, as you move from one trophic level to the next, there is a bioaccumulation or the buildup of some of these persistent pollutants in these beneficial and very useful organisms. Sometimes also, because of this indiscriminate reliance on pesticides, sometimes you have a resistance developing. And this was explained to you on the first day of, on the first module. In a similar manner that insects might develop resistance to pesticides, this might also happen to microbes, fungi, bacteria, nematodes, and all that. And, again, you will always have variants in any population that have some of this resistance. But because in old systems, our agroecosystem is so diverse, we were in a situation where, the populations, the microbes, were taking care of each other. Moderator, could you help me mute some
Sorry,
participants?
Professor, for the inconvenience. We are just following that one.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yes, so you always have some variants, some individuals in a population that may have this resistance to a pesticide. But in most of our agroecosystems, that is before this advent of extensive monoculture everywhere, before this habit of cutting down trees indiscriminately, we had such a diverse reach of microbes in the environment, such that these microbes would take care of each other, and there would always be an equilibrium. We wouldn't have these resistant microbes shooting to high levels. But when you have this heavy reliance on pesticides, heavy bombardment season after season, you end up having these resistant individuals breeding and increasing to high levels, okay? Sometimes in rare cases, you might have mutations. Some of those pesticides, some of the individuals in a microbe population, in the fungus population, bacteria population might undergo mutation, and you end up with resistance, okay? So that comes with this heavy reliance on pesticides. Now, synthetic pesticides, if I just continue with that, I think I've mentioned a lot of this. Pest resurgence, sometimes when you are killing too much of one pest or one organism, you are disturbing the equilibrium, and you end up with one pest shooting up to high levels. I have mentioned already issues to do with human health. Without personal protective equipment, it becomes really a problem for humans. Okay, just as a summary, the whole issue with the diseases, the issue of disease as a problem in agriculture began when monocultures began to intensify. Monocultures is simply an issue where, unlike our great-great-grandparents who would mix crops in a given piece of land or have an intercrop, over time, because of this increasing demand for certain staples like rice in Asia, maize and cassava in some parts of Africa, you have people now clearing huge pieces of land, focusing only on one big crop. That's a monocrop. And so you've ended up having rotations have disappeared in most of the places. You no longer have mixed cropping, you no longer have intercropping. And what happens is that when you have mixed cropping, monocropping, when you have mixed cropping and intercropping, or when you have a diverse set of plants, the spread of diseases and pests is reduced, the reproduction is reduced, the prevalence rates are reduced, because there's all these barriers of non-host crops that are in there. Sometimes there is chemicals produced by one plant that might be repellents to these things. So when you get rid of that diversity, the vulnerability is increasing. And now when you have this vulnerability increasing, the next thing you do is now you see your crop is being threatened. Your rice is almost being wiped out by rice blast fungus because of this monoculture. So now you go heavy use of pesticides. And then this heavy use of pesticides takes us back to the same issues we're talking about. Resistance building up, you have residues on crops, you have natural enemies disappearing, and so on and so forth. Okay? So in the end, we are in this, in other words, at some point we got caught up in this cycle of monocropping and the associated problems. So coming back to those, coming back to the issues I mentioned earlier, the major methods that are used to deal with diseases. I've spoken about synthetic pesticides. Kindly note, I'm crossing out here. I'm not saying that members from today onwards, you should not use synthetic pesticides, just throw them away. No, what I'm saying is we have to be mindful of the environment and we need to find a way of minimizing the usage. If you can do without them completely, that's even better. So then that brought us, as the scientific community was looking at how to deal with diseases, the next concept that came up was integrated disease management. Now, integrated disease management, just a refresher, this was covered on day one, but just a refresher. Here is what the thinking was in crafting integrated disease management. The first thing was that we needed to find an effective method of dealing with this. It's a combination of all these factors. An effective control strategy, which does not jeopardize the environment. And the scientists realized that to achieve this, you need to have a combination of common sense practices, and we will go through some of those. And that we need to understand the disease-causing agents in much more detail so that we can take advantage of the weaknesses in their cycles, we know all living things have cycles. In plant pathology, we have what we call the disease cycle. You need to understand the stages of the disease cycle and figure out what would be the best stage to intervene. So that is something that was built into integrated disease management. There was also a realization that sometimes control needs to be tied to economics. Not sometimes, most times. There are certain scenarios where you actually don't need to do anything. You get into your field, you notice one leaf on one plant in a 5-hectare crop. One leaf has a disease symptom. You may not need to do anything if that disease is not spreading. So, but even as it begins to spread, there is a level at which it begins to cause economic damage, a level at which it begins to affect your profits, your profitability of your enterprise. That would be a good time to start acting, and we'll look into that. Also, there was a realization that these chemicals, they damage the environment, they damage non-target organisms, and so there was need to come up with an approach which takes care of all these factors. Madam Moderator, sorry, I forgot to, we forgot to establish something.
Yes.
At what point would we pause for questions? At which point do you suggest? How much time have we spent so far?
You've only spent 30 minutes. This is 11:01, just 30 minutes. So maybe you
Okay.
go to 12 to 11:30 to mark it 1 hour so that you will pause for
Okay.
questions. Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for that.
Okay.
All right. So now, integrated disease management has some principles. And three of them: prevention, observation, intervention. Sorry for that labeling of one at the bottom. It's supposed to be 1, 2, 3. And prevention, we all know that there is an old adage which says prevention is better than cure. It's always good to put up preventative behaviors, preventative practices, so that you prevent disease from showing up. Because once it shows up, some diseases can be really problematic. Phytophthora infestans or late blight in potato, for example, or in tomato. It can show up today, and before you realize, within a week or a week and a half, you know, a big part of your field is affected. So instead of waiting to start firefighting when the disease shows up, it's always better to be preventative. It's generally cheaper, and it's generally, you know, less stressful, more effective. Well, pesticides, one can say they're effective because they'll kill you know, they'll deal with your disease. But sometimes even fungicides, if you apply them when it is too late, they are not going to help you. So prevention is generally a way to go. So in all those elements of integrated disease management that we discussed in the previous slide, prevention is very important. The second important aspect is what we call observation or monitoring. Now, the reason you do observation and monitoring is because you want to act when there is still time to act.
Hello, Dr. Paul.
Risk 4. In many banana growing areas, there's always been field hygiene practices. If you go into a banana orchard, the owners, they will ask you, no, don't come in with dirty boots. You don't come into my field with, you know, planting materials, which I don't know where it came from, and so on. But those preventative measures didn't work. Something else popped up, which the world did not know about, the tropical race 4. So there are certain cases where prevention, you would have put up your preventative measures, but the disease still shows up. So observations and monitoring is very important. But also, observation and monitoring is a good way of getting to see if the problem is getting out of hand or not. Like I said, you need to act early enough. So that's why this is an important principle in integrated disease management. Then the other important component is now, before we come to the other, which is the last one, intervention, just to explain a little bit more on the importance of monitoring and when should you take action. Like I said, you might have a spore from a fungus landing on your leaf of a plant, of the rice plant or a banana plant. But because perhaps the weather that year was not conducive for this disease, those spores or these disease-causing entities, they will not germinate to infect the plant. And so, or at least it would be restricted, disease incidence and severity. Okay, there are cases like that. But in many cases, the tendency, especially when the season has gone well, it's humid, you have all the condition prerequisites for disease, the general tendency is that disease will start increasing. So because of that, you have to keep monitoring. And you don't, if you take action, then immediately you see the disease, you know, you might just waste money on an intervention. You might be hiring people to implement a certain disease control practice. You might be buying a pesticide. That is really wasted resource because it's not interfering with your yield. However, And as you begin to see the disease is increasing, then you begin to get concerned. That's why you keep monitoring, you keep scouting in your field periodically. At least once a week would be good. Now, there are exceptions to this. There are some diseases that are known to be very, very, very problematic. Sometimes some diseases will show up, like I said with Phytophthora. Your action thresholds might be lower than for, another disease, and I'll explain why. Some diseases, you just see one symptom today, within a few days, it has spread so much. The diseases spread at different rates. So these action thresholds will not be standard for all diseases on all crops. You have to look at what is the typical problem in your area, and you can look from records from the previous season when you grew your crop. What were the diseases that troubled you so much? And from those experiences, you can, get to design proper mitigation measures, or, you can get to assess the points at which you need to take action. Okay. Now, once you have seen that this disease is beginning to get out of hand, of course, now there is intervention. And that's the third principle of integrated disease management. And here, intervention also takes a certain approach, and I'll explain. There are several things you can do to intervene, and we will look at them shortly in the next slide. There are several things you can do to intervene on your crop. You could deploy your IDM. Obviously, we are in integrated disease management now. There's going to be a time now when you need to deploy something. By the time you are growing your crop, I'm assuming you would have taken, time to think about the thresholds that we're talking about. For your crop that you are growing, again, if you have rust and you're worried about rust plus fungus, think about thresholds. At which time do I need to act in case this shows up? Then the other thing you need to think about when you are doing the deployment of interventions in this IDM system is that you must start with safer methods first. Certain preventative practices are much safer than chemical control. Also, there are some methods that are cheaper than others. So when you are intervening, don't jump straight to looking for a pesticide. Usually, people that jump first to looking for a synthetic pesticide, it's typically people that have not planned very well. I should mention that integrated disease management requires planning. It's not just something that you start when your crop is already up, it's germinated and it's already growing. No, it's something that you plan when you are actually thinking about what you're going to grow this coming rain season, or this season if it's a irrigated crop. You have to take into account all your experiences of what were your problematic diseases from your previous cycle, and so on, and what were the environmental conditions from the previous seasons, and think about what are the weather conditions that are being forecasted for the coming season. Because as you all know, depending on the weather conditions, you may have disease or you may not have it. So those are things you need to plan ahead of time. So that you don't rush for the most extreme option when disease shows up. Okay, then in this still under intervention, as a principle in IDM, intervention should be something that should consist of at least 2 methods. 2 is better than 1. Always plan to use 2 or more methods in combination. You know, heavy reliance on pesticides has mostly been because of this. People have not always thought about using 2 methods in combination that are safer than pesticides, but they wait until it's too late, until it's too late to put cultural measures, until it's too late to put some mechanical measures, until it's too late to deploy biological control, and they jump straight into using chemical control. Okay, so now in IDM as components, when we've reached a level where now you take action, like I said, acceptable disease levels, hopefully they have been established by then. And what I was simply saying is that sometimes for a given disease, if you walk into a field and you have an incidence of 1%, that is only 1% of your plants have symptoms, it might not mean that you need to do anything. So that you may not need to worry about. But before you even get to that, once you've established that, then the next thing you need to do is get into cultural practices, preventative cultural practices. And there is I think I've listed a few. Anyway, we'll come to the slide where I talk about a few of those. Some preventative cultural practices. Monitoring would be your next component, like I've said. Once you've deployed your preventative cultural practices, usually they help to prevent disease from building up. But there's always cases where the cultural practices, the preventative ones you put in place don't work. I'll come to the preventative cultural practices. An example of a preventative cultural practice is seed, clean seed. If you say I'm going to plant rice, or I'm going to plant banana or cassava, whichever crop it is, it's very important that you get that seed from either a reputable company that produces this seed from, dedicated fields that have clean, that are clean, kept pathogen free. Or if you are going to use your own seed, which you save, you have to make sure that it's seed, you didn't save this seed from a diseased field. For example, you planted a rice field last year, and then you saw some rice blast fungus there, and you still nevertheless decided to keep some of the rice to plant next season. You know for sure that that seed is going to have, some diseases. Actually, it might even be several diseases might be on that seed. So if you know very well this field had disease last season, don't save any seed from that particular field. Okay? Don't use seed from there. So that's a preventative thing. And I'll mention a few more as we go to the next slide. Monitoring, I've talked about monitoring already. Physical, and kindly note that when you start deploying your components or you're taking action, the way the control methods are listed here is the preferable way in which you should deploy them. In other words, the first control tactic that you should try to pull out should be from preventative. Before you start looking for biological control products, before you skip to that, your disease management regime should be in such a way that when you notice that your preventatives are not well working, and you will notice from monitoring that, well, even though I used the clean seed to plant in this field, my monitoring, since my crop has germinated, is showing me that there is some disease there. If that happens, then you move to physical methods. Okay, don't jump to biologicals. First, move to physical methods. And sometimes it might just require you might find there's a banana field, and you have one plant that is showing some a wilt, for example. you could just chop off that banana plant ahead of time. That is a physical. Before you start looking for trichoderma and other things to come and use to deal with your Fusarium oxysporum on your banana, you could go first with physical. And there's several other physical methods I'll mention in the other slide. And then, of course, you get to biologicals. And I will mention with biologicals again. This is one of the places where there is fancy new things that are becoming available on the market, especially for some AARDO countries like India. And I'll get to that later. There is some new options that are popping up on the market with regards to this. And I will mention it later. Then, as a last resort, chemical control as a last component can come in. But even when you get to chemical control, among chemicals, if you pick fungicides or nematicides, you will find that on the market there's a lot of nematicides available to control diseases. If you have an option for under chemical, you might have botanical extracts that might work for your disease. It's very rare for plant diseases and botanical extracts, but you might have a botanical extract. So that pesticide would almost be like closer to biological control. Actually, some people classify it under biological control. But even among the synthetic ones, you have different categories. For the same fungal disease, you can have 3 or 4 or 5 different synthetic chemical fungicides that can deal with that fungal disease. Now, if you reach that level where you must touch one of these 5, always go for the least toxic. And I will show you on the next slide that fungicides or any pesticides, they always have a label that shows, that speaks to their toxicity. Some of them are color coded, which is easier to follow. You'll find there's green, some are color coded green, those would be the least toxic, and all the way to those that are color coded red. Those would be very, very toxic. So should you find yourself here and there's really nothing you can do but to try and use this, it happens sometimes where there's an outbreak that was not anticipated. If I'm to follow an example for armyworm from insects, a lot of countries in Africa, for example, when fall armyworm popped up, we didn't have options for biological control and so on. So that might happen. Now, let's go a little bit more on this in the next 10 minutes before our break. Like I said, sometimes some diseases might surprise us. And even though you were properly prepared, they might catch you, unawares. But we should try our best. Like, for example, if I've spoken about acceptable disease levels, that, as a component of IDM, this idea of setting up acceptable disease levels may vary. I was giving an example of Fusarium oxysporum tropicalis 4. This one is a quarantine pest in most places. Like in Africa now, I know that it's first of all, many places, especially the banana growing places, we had the Fusarium oxysporum first show up in those places, and there's been several races. And then we have the tropicalis 4, which is really, people in the banana industry, they are a little worried about it, especially if you are in a country that doesn't accept GMOs. We have some GMO banana varieties that can actually resist this, but I'll come to that later. So there are certain quarantine pests for which it might be difficult for you to think of ahead of time and create acceptable disease levels, okay? Because maybe it's something that just popped out of nowhere. Maybe somebody accidentally brought some bananas from, you know, a country which has this and nobody anticipated that. So that might be an exception. And so, but also in that case, your thresholds, it will be more sensitive. Okay, you don't want any plant. Your acceptable disease level in a situation of a quarantine pest disease like Fusarium, you don't want any diseased plant. But there are some rusts. There are some diseases that are caused by rust, where for some reason, you see the rust is increasing slowly in the crop, but it's not really, and I'm not saying all rusts are like this. You know, there's a, you know, there are some cases, and that's why monitoring is very important. There are some rusts for which they will show up and they will not do a lot of harm. So for those, maybe your acceptable disease level might be higher. A higher percentage of diseased plants might be tolerable before you actually have to take action. Okay. Also, I've already said this, that it will also differ depending on the speed of spread of the disease you're talking about. But this information is widely available in most manuals. If we had more time in this training, I could have looked around and gotten some of the, you know, common diseases in other countries and try to put up something much more guiding. But because we don't have enough time, I had to talk in general on some of these things. Now, action thresholds, I think I've mentioned that. Something that you take action when, you know, when disease has gone beyond that level. Now, cultural control measures. Let's see, get back to this a little bit. I was mentioning the idea of clean planting materials. There has been a technique recently which came up in connection with the clean planting materials that farmers are being encouraged to pilot. I do realize that in agriculture, not everybody has, you know, not all these tactics are readily available to everyone. Some people might economic constraints, and so they may try to resort to cheaper ones. For example, I did mention that certified seed is a good way to go. Some people, in some cases, in the event they are unable to buy the seed because it's too expensive from these seed companies, there is a community concept that is being piloted in many places called community seed banks, where if you have farmers in a given area, maybe they're interested in rice growing or banana growing or so on. With the help of maybe the Ministry of Agriculture or whoever the National Plant Protection Authority is for a given country, they could now organize these communities to have what is called community seed banks, where they are able to learn from each other and under the guidance of that I'm talking about, you know, pollinated crops. Some hybrids or open pollinated varieties. Hybrids, obviously, it's a different story altogether because seed companies, they build that in there to ensure that it's not always possible. If you retain seed of a hybrid by yourself, it's, you know, almost not useful if you keep that seed. But for some self-pollinated crops like rice and others, it might be, this is something that could be tried. Maybe 1 or 2 or 5 or even 10 community members, and then they can engage the extension persons for the government for their area to have these areas where they are multiplying their seeds and they are taking care to make sure there is no disease showing up there. I think this is something that can be, if it's really looked into closely, it might be a game changer for many places. I know some countries have tried this before, but I think there's need to have concerted efforts on things like this as part of your integrated disease management strategy. Now, there are also cases where if you plant early, you avoid periods when the disease builds up in the season. Okay, depending on your the disease in question. Okay, there's other cases where late planting might be favorable. Okay, but so this is an important preventative cultural practice. Then mulching. There is a, by the way, some of the lists I'm giving here, they are by no means exhaustive. There is lots and lots of preventative cultural control measures you can put up. Mulching, where you're covering the soil surface, sometimes, you know, tends, as long as the mulch, the plant material that you're using as mulch is not, you know, contaminated with disease. Sometimes flooding. Some people have tried flooding for some time now, and flooding might help you to deal with the disease-causing microbes in the soil, okay, for a period of time before you plant your crop. There's what we also call trap crops or decoy crops. This, in the scheme of integrated disease management, would be a very good thing to explore. There are some plant varieties which, when you plant near your crop, there are some plant species, and of course we've understood this from you know, once we lost crop diversity and we started monoculture, we started realizing that there's something we've lost by getting rid of all these shrubs and different species that we used to have near our farms. Some studies have shown that some of these shrubs can actually secrete substances in the soil that causes, you know, that forces your microbes to germinate, you know, and they germinate and they'll find there is no host. Therefore, they die off. There is also cases where some of these plants actually produce substances that kill the microbes in the soil or prevent the microbes from growing. So there's several of these, and this, I think, is one of the new areas that really need to be looked into. Of course, there is studies all over the world for different crop species that could be used in this, and I think this is something that should be considered for when you're looking at integrated disease management, especially when you're thinking of a low input farmer who cannot afford some of these fancy technologies. Resistant varieties is another thing you can build into your integrated disease management. Of course, when we come to organic agriculture and agroecology, we will hear that the use of resistant varieties, if it's a native resistant species, it's maybe very welcome. But if it's a hybrid, especially if it's a GMO from somewhere, that resistant variety may not be welcome. Madam Moderator, I think it's 11:30, so perhaps I should pause here for, I think it's going to be questions. And I don't know whether there'll be a break after the questions, or after the questions, we go straight into continuation of these slides. Over to you, Madam Moderator.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you, presenter, for the presentation, for the good presentation. I now open the floor for questions. I can see some hands here. There is one from Mr. Light Shadrach from Nigeria. You can ask your questions. And also followed by Dr. Sabina Fatima, you can ask your questions after Mr. Shadrach has asked.
Okay, thank you very much. I must say it has been a very engaging and enlightening session. My question is a very straightforward one. I would like to share an experience as a farmer, and I will ask a question relating to predictability. Predictability here means, do we have any option as to be able to predict what a particular farming season would look like? Why I ask this question is that I planted some crops, some vegetables in the same place I've been planting for years, but something happened this particular farming season. I discovered that there was a version of pest, snail, a very tiny species of snail. I've not seen that kind of snail before. They massively attacked the crops, and I went to a store to complain to somebody selling pesticides. He made some recommendation. I applied them, but it didn't solve the problem. I continued to apply. It wasn't really solving the problem. I had to resort to the local method we used to do in our villages. In those days, we used to resort to using ashes to pour on our crops to stop, those. That was what really saved the day. But what I want to know, possibly from what we've learned so far here, is there any option of knowing, using technology or whatever to know if in a particular year, what farming in a particular season will look like? Is there any way we can predict whether there will be a pest attack within a particular area for a particular season? Is there any such technology? Is there any such option? That's my question.
Thank you. Dr. Sabina, you can ask your question. We get to.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Paul Kachapulala, for your excellent presentation. My questions are, is there any economic threshold levels for crops at global level instead of using low, medium, and high scale rating for diseases? And my second question is manual monitoring is better or using drones, etc.? Thank you.
The presenter can maybe take the two questions before we proceed.
Thank you, moderator. And thank you, Shadrach and Dr. Sabina, for the questions. Predicting farming seasons. I think this is a very important component of integrated disease management. If we are going to effectively deal with snails and several other things that might pop up, I agree with you. We must be able to predict from the onset of the season. Now, unfortunately, in many developing countries, our predictions are a little difficult to do. And let me explain. There are several aspects to prediction. The first one is you must be able to predict what the weather is going to look like, because we know that the amount of humidity you expect in a given season, the amount of rainfall you are expecting in this coming season, the amount of the temperature regimes you expect, these are all going to affect living things. They will affect the snails, they will affect the armyworms, they will affect the disease, fungi, bacteria, nematodes, and so on. So if you develop a good weather monitoring system, you should be able to predict what pest problems, partially get to understanding what pest problems you are likely to have. However, this requires that not only should you have a good meteorological station that can predict for you. I know these days sometimes there's several other databases that you can access apart from our own country level databases. There are certain global databases with countries that have much stronger prediction power. They can actually tell you what is likely to happen in your country in terms of these variables. So if either as countries we are able to develop that, strengthen that prediction, or we are able to tap into, I know tapping into some of these, most of them they'll require you to subscribe and pay an amount. And if it's something that can be done, if there can be discounts or some types of concession to access those databases, that would be a very, very good start in terms of figuring out what pest problems or disease problems you are likely to have. The second thing that we have seen happening elsewhere is that we could sample the environment before the season. What I mean is this. And this does not, of course, the more extensive the sampling is, and maybe becomes expensive, if it's more extensive. But you could sample to look at the microbes you have in the environment, in the air, in the soil, and these give you an indication of what type of epidemics you are likely to have. Because your epidemics, of course, they will be caused mostly by fungi, microbes that are already existing in your environment. There is a case where something shows up from a different continent, and then all of a sudden an epidemic is there. For something like that, it's very difficult to predict it. But if it's something that you have been having, a disease or a pest that you've been having year in, year out, I think we should be serious. We can access weather information. We can look. Insects, for example, we know some of them will have eggs in the soil. Okay, fungi, we know they will have spores or chlamydospores or propagules in the soil. So it should be easy to sample and combine that to arrive at a prediction. Of course, this will require, let me not say this will require technical expertise. In most of our countries, we do have people that have been privileged to be educated in some of these, advanced universities. So in terms of human knowledge, I think we are slowly building that up. It's just a matter of, deliberately putting up these units that can combine this weather data and what is existing in the environment to deal with, to predict. And like I said, this might be easy for something that you are having recurring, but it might be a challenge for some pest that is randomly brought in by a careless person from, who traveled to another place. The thresholds, economic thresholds, global level, and you're talking about low, medium, high. Yes, it is true that in most cases, that's how we categorize it. But I think we need to refine it. The low, medium, high is good if that's the only thing you have. But I think we now have models. We do have models where if you feed in various parameters, attributes of a pathogen, attributes of the environment, we can be able to deal with thresholds that are just, that we are not viewing from the angle of low, medium, high. I think the low, medium, high still works if that's the only thing you're using. But we do have models, and these are published models. You can just pull it up, feed in your various parameters to figure out what thresholds you should be thinking about for a given crop in given pest or disease situation. Now, manual versus drone monitoring. There's a slide where I propose drone when we come to the monitoring stage. And the manual monitoring, I should say that, if you have some experts, some trained personnel, and to monitor disease, you don't really need someone with a PhD to go monitor disease or a professor. you can get even some farm workers, they can be taken through some courses to show them how symptoms look like. I know that in many other countries, not to say that labor is cheap, but in terms of the manual monitoring, if you have, some people that you can train on identifying diseases and disease symptoms, it's still possible to use that. Now, using a drone, of course, is much better. And these days we have drones that you can fit GIS software and you feed them with cameras. And what they do is periodically this drone flies. By the way, before we even get to the drone, there is, even some people are trying to use satellite images. Of course, that is higher level technology that requires you to be able to zero in on a given piece of land and look at the green versus dark patches and so on. But a drone is much better. And if you have all these GIS software fitted in there and some nice cameras with high resolution lenses, you can have drones passing over, pieces of land to take images of the green, the canopy, the crop canopy. And from those images, you can figure out, obviously, there's color contrast. The diseased tissue is going to be either brown or yellow, and the healthy one will be green. And if you have defoliation because of a disease, the canopy is obviously less. So flying drones like that, this is one of the new things around for doing this monitoring. It might seem like maybe the drone will not be reachable for certain farmers categories, but I think the prices of these drones has been steadily coming down. So if we have NPPOs, the National Plant Protection Authorities, most of them for many countries, most of these sit in the Ministry of Agriculture and so on. It's possible to have communal drones, not where you expect every farmer to have their own drone, no, but to have, I don't know, again, depending on how the agri farmers are arranged. In Zambia, we have what we call, in each district, we have what is called agricultural blocks. So you can have maybe 3, 4, 5 blocks in each district. And then in each block, maybe you have camps, several camps. So you could buy a drone maybe for one block. And so maybe, 3 or 4 for district or even less. I think this is something that needs to be looked into. The beauty with having something like that is the farmers can even interact and receive advice from extension people that might be sitting in an office at the headquarters of the district when they, receive such. I'm glad, Dr. Sabina, you've asked this question so that when I reach that part of the slides, I don't have to explain much since I've covered it here. Thank you. Over to you, moderator.
Okay, thank you very much for answering those questions. We go to the next 3. Sami, Masuzio Mwale, and Dr. Ahmed Taha. You can ask your questions in that order, starting with Sami, followed by Masuzio Mwale and Dr. Taha. Thank you. Sami, you can ask your question. Hello? Okay, maybe Masuzio Mwale, you can go ahead while we're waiting for Sami if he's not around. Masuzio Mwale from Zambia, followed by Dr. Taha. You can ask your question.
Oh, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My question is, I have seen a mango tree which is wilting from the other side, then the other side is fresh and even having fruits. So I just wanted to know what problem could be that. Like from the other side, it's totally dry. Then from from the other side, it's even bearing fruits. Thank you.
Dr. Taha, you can ask your question so that the presenter can pick two at the same time. Dr. Ahmed Taha.
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Hello.
With your...
You hear me? Okay. Thank you very much for your very much illustrative and tutorial presentation, sir. You just mentioned that the possibility of use plant extracts in controlling plant diseases. So I wonder to which extent we can use plant extracts to control diseases, and how we can improve their efficacy and durability after application in the field. You got my question? No?
Doctor, okay,
yes, I did, Dr. Taha. Thank you.
Okay, maybe we can pick one more question. We can pick one more question. Dr. Anas Muhammad from Jordan, are you ready for a question?
Assalamu alaikum. Yes, I'm ready. I have one note and one comment and one question.
Okay, please go ahead.
The comment is the major problem in developing countries is that the farmers stick with spraying schedule, whether the pest appear or not appear, which is a major problem. And the question is, did you consider the quarantine system as one of the prevention steps? As I believe, quarantine system is what is one of major thing in the controlling disease. And that's it.
Thank you very much for the questions. Dr. Paul, maybe you can go in for the 3 questions.
Thank you very much, moderator, and thank you, Masuzio and Dr. Taha and Dr. Anas for your questions. Starting with Masuzio, the fact that one side is wilting, maybe one or a few branches, there's wilting, and the other side you have the proper fruit growing. That typically is symptomatic of a disease, because there's been cases where a plant wilts because somebody forgot to irrigate, and so the plant wilts. Or maybe somebody scorched the plant and it begins to look like maybe it's wilting, when in fact it's not a disease, it's something abiotic. So for your case, the wilting of that mango, it's most likely a pathogen. Now, to get to telling you which actual pathogen is responsible for that wilting, I need to look at if you send me an image, or if I can get some tissue, I can confirm suspicion, because wilting in a branch simply means there is something that is breaking down the conductive tissue, the xylem and the phloem. It could be there's a bacterium that's breaking down that vascular system, or maybe there's a fungus. So it could be one of those. Just seeing a wilting branch in itself will not tell me what is causing that. And therefore, unless I know exactly what it is, that ties into the mitigation measure I would give you. So that would be my answer for you, Amasuzia. Dr. Taha, you're talking about plant extracts and efficacy and durability. So we do know, and there is many people that are trying out these now, and they're at various levels of testing. We know that there is extracts that, again, going back to that diverse, bushy, rich agroecosystem, we know that there is a plant. There are certain exudates from plants that interfere with germination of certain microbe species. So to really refine this, we have to get to proper research, pairing first of all, once you realize this exudate seems to be inhibiting germination of spores, for example, the good thing to start is to get some extract and fractionate that extract. See which components are actually responsible for that germination inhibition of the fungus that we are noticing. And there is quite some studies going on there, but it's not yet super advanced, but there is a potential there. On a crude level, one thing someone could do would be just to get extracts of that plant, maybe crush them, soak them, and go spray in field. If you are talking on a crude, small-scale farmer level. But until we reach that level where we're able to refine them, I think this is something that is ongoing. And what I think is once we know these compounds, the issue with durability and efficacy. Of course, efficacy has got several issues to do with the durability, as in how long does it stay in the environment? Assuming it's a plant extract that you either sprayed on the plant surface or is sprayed in the soil, how long does it take in the environment? We know one of the things that break down, sometimes UV light breaks down chemical compounds. So really, we need to subject the candidate extracts from all these conventional things we've subjected synthetic pesticides to, so that we figure out how to increase the durability and the efficacy of these things. But what I need to mention is we are rapidly losing diversity. I was listening to a program this morning by WWF, which is talking about 70% of species having been lost since 1970s. So if we don't do something about these natural plant species we find in the forests and try to conserve them and study them some more, we might miss out on this issue that Dr. Taha raises. Coming to Dr. Anas, I agree with your comment. The spray, whether you see the fungus or you don't, is sort of a default setting for, especially for the farmers that can afford the pesticides, or the farmers who cannot afford the pesticide, but there's a government program that has bought the pesticide for them. So that comment I agree with. And your question is on quarantine systems. Yes, I agree with that also. As one of the monitoring thing, again, just issues with time. I don't know if I have it there in monitoring, but quarantine is a very good preventative method to prevent things from coming into the country. I know that many developed countries, they are pretty sensitive. If you're going to bring a certain agricultural commodity, they will not allow you. Some will scrutinize it closely, but many people will not allow. But where you have challenges with funding for customs and border enforcement and sanitary and phytosanitary issues, it becomes, if the level of funding there is low, it really limits the extent to which you can use quarantine, especially at the borders. Unless it's something that's, you're quarantining something within a certain region, within the country, but that still also needs that that region, if there is a rice disease in this northern part of the country, you need to put some kind of quarantine measures to make sure that this doesn't move out. Thank you for that, Dr. Anas. Moderator, back to you.
Also, excuse me. Also, there is internal quarantine, which prevents spreading of pests from region to region inside the same country. We can.
That is very correct. That is very correct. Here in Zambia, we have cassava brown streak. And so far, we have managed to restrict it only to the northern region of the country. So yes, that is correct. It's quarantined at the borders with other countries, but also internally. And all those require, sometimes internally, if you have extension people and agricultural coordinators on the ground, if you sensitize those, they can help you to keep an eye on what is happening. But yes, I agree with you, Dr. Anas. Thank you, moderator.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we'll pick the next three questions from Dr. Mohamed Farouk from Egypt, Yusria from Sudan, and Richard Yevo. The next three questions you can ask so that we go to the next phase.
Hello. Hello, you are hearing me?
Yes, yes, we are hearing you. Go ahead with your question.
Yeah. Thanks for your presentation. In the developing country, there is a dilemma about how to regionalize the pests and the diseases. So we spend our money and waste our money from the mistake of the genesis. So I asked, what is the new technology can you regionalize the pests and the diseases to control it on the time, and we save our money from don't use any pesticides or any biological control out of the scheme. Thank you.
Okay, Yusria from Sudan, you can ask a question, followed by Richard. Yusria Ibrahim, followed by Richard.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are clear. You can go ahead.
Okay. Doctor, from your experience, can you please give us more examples of diseases that requires a quick action or response to manage them when they present on the field? Thank you.
Richard, you can go ahead with your question. Richard Yevo. Richard, are you there? Okay, in the interest of time, maybe Muhammad, are you ready for the question? Muhammad T something. Sorry for the name, I can't pronounce it.
Hello, can you hear me? Richard?
Okay, Richard, go ahead, please.
Yes, what I was asking is, thank you, Doctor, for your in-depth presentation. I would like to ask questions about fall armyworm. We have used both synthetic pesticides and organic pesticides to control fall armyworm, but it's still resurges every cropping season. Do we have any alternative that can curb that menace for us? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You can go ahead with the three questions. I hope you've gotten them. Presenter.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think I did get most of them. I struggled a little bit to get what Dr. Farouk was asking, but I think if I got him correctly, he was referring to what kind of technology to use for diagnosis, because you know, so much money is spent on dealing with these issues when. If you use proper diagnosis, you might require maybe in certain cases you don't need to use those. I agree. If you misdiagnose something, you might use a different chemical there and it will not work, or you use a different remedy and it will not work because you got the causal organism wrong. So I agree with him that proper diagnosis is important. Okay, that is if indeed I'm correct that you're talking about diagnosis. Now, there are several things that could be done in diagnosis. And I've seen this working in many places. First of all, to do proper diagnosis, you need to have a clear-cut understanding of symptoms, disease symptoms. There are some symptoms that are clear-cut. They'll tell you this is a virus, or this is a fungus, or this is a bacteria. However, there is also other symptoms, like I gave an example of wilt, which you will not know whether this is a fungus or it's a bacteria, or just a blight. You might not know what has caused it. So if you have someone who understands symptoms, basic training on symptoms will help in disease diagnosis. But if you want to go a step further, the new tactics that are being used now is to use DNA for disease diagnosis. Now, a long time ago, using what is called polymerase chain reaction. A long time ago, this used to be a very expensive technology. But now, the prices are coming down. And I do recommend that NPPOs should try to invest in this. You just need a PCR machine. If you go out in the field, the farmers are calling you that there is a certain disease X in their region. And if you reach there and you're struggling to diagnose what it is, just get a few plant tissues from there and bring into the laboratory, and extract the DNA or RNA, whatever it is. Through that process, you are able to figure out what the actual cause organism is. And following from that, even whatever you recommend as a remedy will be effective. For example, if you have a symptom in a plant and it looks like it's a virus, okay? We know that some viruses will be transmitted by certain insects, others will not be. So once you figure out which virus it is that's troubling you, which you can do if you have, PCR technology, and this can be maybe even at a district level. You can have one district or county level. The NPPO can have that, and then farmers are bringing some of those symptoms that are difficult to, diagnose. I think that's what I would say for Dr. Dr. Farouk's question. Now, Yusri, you're talking about which diseases must we act quickly on? Two things. It's diseases that, first of all, diseases spread, the impact is different. Some are high impact in terms of the damage. Okay, there is other diseases that also speed of spread is very high. And then you have diseases for which you have vectors. If you know there's a certain viral disease that could hit your crop, again, all this depends on the crops you have. The list of these diseases depends on the crops. So, and I could throw in something on the materials that will be given to you as participants at the end of a training with just some examples. But the actual diseases will depend on the crop that you are worried about. And of course, we know we have hundreds of crops worldwide. But the key factors there is what type of damage does this typically cause? There are some diseases that go even up to 100% damage. You have to be worried about those. The moment they show up, you need to act. There is diseases also that are vector transmitted. If you notice that the vector for this disease is there in your country, you don't want that disease to show up because you know that the moment it shows up, it will be very easy to spread. Okay, and if you have a conducive environment, there are some diseases we know that love the tropics. Okay, if you are in a very humid environment, such diseases, you should be concerned with them. There is other diseases that love some low temperature, like some powdery mildews. In in winter, when your temperatures are low, you see it going really up. So I would say it depends on the crop. If you can throw some crops of interest, maybe we can look into it after the training. It depends on, and there are some, there are some diseases that are known they spread fast. If I talk, lead blight on potato and tomato is one thing that comes straight off the top of my head. And a lot of these virus, vector transmitted viral diseases. So I think that would be my answer for you for now. Richard and for Amiwem, of course, I was talking about diseases, but and I'm not an expert entomologist, but here is what I think with the resurgence. If you look at the fall armyworm, where it's coming from, in Africa, yes, we got it around 2016 and it spread to many parts in Africa and even in Zambia. Year in, year out, the thing is resurging. Every single season since 2016, we've been battling this fall armyworm. So it's a big issue. Now, my thinking is, when you are spraying, of course, even the synthetic pesticides that are being applied, there are various degrees of efficacy. And also remember, you have the adult, you have eggs, you have larvae. So we don't know how much of, how much of each of these life stages we are actually targeting. But to answer your question, what I think is to deal with fall armyworm in the long term, of course, we will continue firefighting with pesticides because this is a pest that just ambushed us out of nowhere. To deal with the fall armyworm in the long term, we have to learn from the Americas where it came from. And also, so in the Americas, of course, because they've had time, they have biological control. They have microbes, which they are using, Beauveria bassiana, among others, entomopathogens, nuclear polyhedrosis viruses, and all those. And the beauty with these, if we get to that level, the beauty is when you introduce these in an environment, at the end of the season, the spores of that fungus, they'll stay in the environment. So that by the time the fungus, the insect starts, attempts to grow up at the beginning of the season, you already have this fungus in the field to deal with it. So this is like closer to the natural control, natural interaction. So I think that would be a better way to go. The pesticides, yes, in the short term, but pesticides don't have residual effect to say we sprayed this year, then next year we are covered. We have to now look at other methods like intercropping, mixed cropping, try to introduce biological control. And there's many microbes that have been demonstrated in India and also in places where this pest came from. Moderator, may I beg that we move to the next set of slides? I see it's 12:10, which means we only have 20 minutes.
Okay, so you have something else to present? Maybe yeah, we allow you to continue with the presentation. Then at the end of the presentation, that's when we can allow more questions.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, you can go ahead, please.
Thank you, moderator. Those with questions can just hold on to them, and let me just touch some key elements of what is remaining, and then we can get back to the discourse as soon as possible. Okay, so I said the first one is what we are looking at, the preventative cultural approach. Then your next, and here I was just showing an example here. You see on your left, on the right of your screen, you have the soybean plants that are really being killed by soybean cyst nematode. And on the right, you have this healthy soybean. And the difference is that here in this field here where you have soybeans that's really suffering, you see year in, year out, they've been putting the same soybean here. But in that area there, they put maize, peanuts, and then soybeans in rotation. So that rotation is what has helped there as a cultural practice. Okay, now we were talking about monitoring. Once you've set up all these preventative things, you've put in your seed which you think has resistance, and therefore maybe disease will not show up. The next thing you do is you keep monitoring and scouting. Of course, thanks to the question by Sabina, I think we did look a little bit into the scouting, but let me mention a few things just about that. So typically, and you've seen this slide before, you go in a zigzag manner, in a random manner, and you, at every spot, you are stopping to look at the number of plants with symptoms, okay? That's one way you can do the monitoring, which is the manual one. You could also use drones, like I said earlier on. Since I mentioned about drones, and thank you to the question by Dr. Farouk on diagnosis. I talked about PCR, so I will skip this slide, except to say that these are modern techniques which NPPOs can invest into, okay? Still monitoring. One other thing I should mention on monitoring is once you see...
Doctor?
May I finish real quick, Dr. Farouk, and then we can get questions.
Okay.
Thank you. So one other thing that is new and which we should, as much as possible in the developing world, try to tap into is the digital tools by Kabi. These digital tools have got lots and lots of pictures of different plant diseases. So if you have a smartphone, you could just go into the field, pick out a plant, damaged tissue, and you could scroll through numerous databases. More images are being added. They can help with this monitoring, the diagnosis part. But also, these same databases also have fact sheets. There's fact sheets on numerous diseases. So once you find what disease it is you need to deal with, you might find a fact sheet on that disease, which tells you about how the disease spreads and what control methods are effective against this pathogen. So I highly recommend the inclusion of these into IDM, Integrated Disease Management. This is an example of a plant clinic, in action. And you don't need the training that we give for plant doctors. It's not very, it's actually...
Did I know that? I know, but I didn't know you.
Moderator, could you help?
We're coming.
Thank you. So the training in communities, this is something that has been piloted and it actually works. We could have through NPPOs, communities, and there are very easy modules that are used to train plant doctors in communities. Could be the village headman, it could be the councillor, it could be, even lead farmers. This is something that can be done. And the module it's like just a week or two, and you have plant doctors trained. Of course, there will not be, hardcore PhD plant pathologists, explaining, but at the level of operation where they're able to monitor and they can even alert you by SMS to say, this thing, last week we saw 2 plants, now we are seeing 4 plants. This would be a very good game changer for NPPOs in terms of managing pests and diseases. Okay, so Going further, physical, I think I have mentioned physical. We do know, for example, rogging. If you go into your maize field or a rice field and you see there's only one plant showing that symptom, you know, this is the next thing you do. Before you think biological, before you think pesticides, I think you can just pull that one plant. Rogging is a good example. Now, when it comes to destruction, I know we shouldn't be banning, you know, debris. Maybe burying can work because it's still going to be part of organic matter. But this requires some guidance with extension people because there are some pathogens which some saprophytes, you bury them, you don't kill them. They actually continue enjoying and living on that dead tissue until the following season. Disinfection, cleaning of material, this is something that can be done. Hygiene. There are some diseases for which you can, you know, some viral diseases from which you can do meristem tissue culture where you dip in some hot water and it will help deal with the, you know, physically deal with the pest. I mentioned solarization in the last stage here. This is can work for some soil pathogens where you irrigate some water a given piece of land, and then you cover with plastics for a given period of time, depending on the microbe you're trying to kill. What happens is as the sun is shining on this material, heat builds up under there. Of course, this is something that works better on small scale. It will be difficult to do this on 10 hectares of land with plastic everywhere. Now, then the next component, as we are moving in complexity, and remember, as we move along this way, the way you can add 2 or more of these things. There's what we call biological control, using some microbes to control others. And there is a research in many places on these beneficial microbes. A good example is trichoderma. Trichoderma, you put it in the soil, it produces certain substances that inhibit or interfere with the normal growth of your pathogens. These are some examples listed here. And there are actually some products that have started showing up on the market. I didn't want to put them here because it would be confused for advertising. But actually, if you consult your NPPOs as farmers, they should be able to advise you on the products. Now, the only thing I'm not sure about here is the price, the cost. It would be good if the costs of these products are lower than the chemical pesticides, because the chemical pesticides, certainly in the short term, they kill the pathogen much faster than the biologicals. So the biologicals require you to prepare ahead of time so that you give this microbe time to either establish, or even if you are going to do inundative approach, you still need time to culture and grow a lot of these microbes. So there are more examples of what is available, Apellomyces and Pseudomyces. So I will skip that in the interest of time. I should just mention one more, since we are also concerned with food safety in this, when we deal with microbes. I did mention mycotoxins. Mycotoxins can pop up and can be an issue, interfere with your health. It might cause, acute aflatoxicosis and so on. So there is a technology called Aflasef. Aflasef is a trade name. I mean, that's been used in Africa, but essentially it's an issue of getting aspergillus flavus, which does not produce aflatoxin, and you spray it in your field. So it will competitively exclude the microbes that would have otherwise have contaminated your crop to cause mycotoxins. So I think this is also a good game changer. The advantage also is that this microbe, over time, it begins to establish in the field. So you might reach a level where you don't need to keep, adding huge quantities of the same. Okay. Then I think the pesticides I've already mentioned. There was a question to do with safety. This is the color coding I was referring to. If you must use them, start with the green. I will skip that. Then let me mention two things as quickly as I can because of time. There is organic agriculture. We know, we probably have heard what organic agriculture is. The key thing, if I'm to mention it in a summary, is this system tries to avoid the use of synthetic pesticides. Of course, also other inputs like certain synthetic fertilizers are discouraged, which means here it's obviously a no-no for pesticide use. If you are going to have an issue here and you want to control diseases in here, pesticides are not allowed, okay? So, just quickly, if you are going to do organic agriculture, the issue is you must maintain health, you must take care in practices that you do, don't harm the environment. There is an issue of fairness, let me mention here. In organic agriculture, if you are going to have hybrids, for example, there's going to be an issue of is this hybrid, is it accessible to people around here? You've used our natural genetic resources to make this hybrid. Is it available to people? And then there is also an issue of the principle of the ecology. We have ecological systems. In the soil, it's an ecology. We look at disease management in a holistic manner. If you are going to deal with a soil pathogen, you have to be mindful that in the soil, there's many other microbes there. Now, let me add, I'll skip this. Let me add one more principle, which is similar to organic agriculture, which is agroecology. But as I go there, let me mention one quick thing. We talked about the principle of health as being important to organic agriculture. And health is for all elements of living things in that agroecosystem. So if all you are interested is in to use chemicals to kill your pathogen, you're killing other things. So it contradicts the principle of health. The principle of care, you must not damage the environment when you're doing organic agriculture. And the use of chemicals certainly does the opposite. I have mentioned about hybrid varieties. And I think I also have mentioned about the ecology to say, even in water as ecology, if you are planting your rice, paddy rice, water is an ecosystem. You don't want, as you're applying, disease management there, you don't want to kill other things in that ecosystem. Okay, now, the last concept, which is similar to organic agriculture, is what is called agroecology. And to try and explain that, I'll flash some images. There is paddy rice here, and there's a maize crop, a mango crop growing in there. So there's effective utilization of the water and other nutrients you add there, okay? This is another setting where you can see that different types of vegetables, and they are mixed at the same time with the trees and fruit trees and natural trees and so on. Okay, this happens. Here's another image of somewhere in Uganda. You can see there is a planted trees, there's naturally existing trees, and there's a diversity of crops here. Okay. And then here's another one. You have rice growing in a fish pond, and you have ducks. Some of the manure from here being put in the fish pond. They are being eaten by fish. They fertilize the rice. You can see there is a forests around. So that is the whole idea of an agroecological crop production. You are saying systems must be interconnected. The soil ecosystem, the water ecosystem, forest ecosystem must be maintained in line with the way it was before monoculture came in. So whatever pest management practices you bring, they must not disrupt this. But also you will realize that if you have a system like this, the tendency is that you're going to have less pests and less diseases, and you may not end up requiring investing so much time and effort in disease and pest management. I think in a summary, that's what I will say about agroecology. But there are slides where I explain that, and you will look at them slowly in your own time. I should just say that these are the methods, and I've explained each of these in detail, that are acceptable for organic agriculture production and when you are in an agroecological agricultural setting. So I think in summary, I would just say that there's a lot of techniques here we've discussed. Remember, the overriding thing is integrated disease management, and we need to try and marry in as much of these as we can. Thank you very much for your attention. Over to you, moderator.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, presenter, for that presentation. So we are remaining with 3 minutes to go before 12:30. So I invite questions. So we continue where we ended. So there are, how many questions? We have got 5 people. So we can start with Pratma, Iman, and then Dr. Muhammad. No, the people have not asked. Emmanuel, David, you can ask your questions in that order. Pratma, Iman, then Emmanuel David from Nigeria. You can ask your questions. Thank you. Pratma, you can start your ask your question. Please unmute yourself. We don't have much time, so maybe Iman, if you are ready with your question, you can go ahead. Iman, then.
Hello, ask in chat.
Okay, I'll read the questions in the chat. Then Emmanuel David, if you've got your question ready, then Hilal Abdul Ibrahim from Sudan, you can ask your question in that order. Emmanuel and Hilal, you can ask questions. Thank you. There is a lot of noise coming from you, Emmanuel. We can't hear you. Emmanuel, David,
I can hardly. I can't hear you.
It's a pity we can't hear you, Emmanuel David. But if possible, please type your question in the chat. Then we go to the next one. Hilal Ibrahim from Sudan. Are you ready with the question? Hilal, if you are ready with the question, because we are remaining with very little time, we want to capture as many questions as possible. Pratma, I don't know if you are ready this time.
Hello.
Yes, you can go ahead. Hilal, you can, from Sudan, you can go ahead.
Okay. My name is Hilal from Sudan. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead with your question.
Okay, and yes, my question. First question: how determine factors affecting development of epidemic and forecasting of this plant? And what difference between second question? One difference between endophytic and gene resistant. For example, BT Gutun, Bacillus. Thank you.
Presenter, I don't know if you've gotten the question from.
I will try. I was struggling to hear what you're saying. I suspect, I don't know if you're talking about factors in the development of an epidemic. I don't know if I heard him say that. And then I heard him mention something about endophytes, and I don't know whether I said BT cotton. I didn't follow that closely.
Yes. Yes, some difference between endophytic and BT or genus.
I'm
Yes.
really sorry. I'm struggling to hear you, Hilal. You say the difference between an endophyte and BT cotton. Hilal,
Yes,
hello?
yes. What difference between to fight, for example, into basic fungi or bacteria, and gene resistant, for example, BT cotton, some different or no?
BT cotton resistance is different from endophytes. BT resistance cotton is a variety of cotton which produces an antefidant chemical against Lepidoptera, as an example, so that when the Lepidoptera try to feed on that BT cotton, they fail to do so. There's also BT technology that has been introduced for several other insect species. Endophytes are simply microbes that naturally live inside a plant, and they do various things. Usually endophytes are positive. They are those microbes that live inside the plant, and they positively contribute to the health and growth of the plant. I hope I got you correct, Hilal.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, present. I don't know if you've answered the first question, which was asked.
Is something to do with factors, an epidemic? Okay, so
Yeah.
there's several things, and these are factors that you look into when you're trying to forecast what's going to happen in terms of the disease situation.
Yes, forecasting. Yes.
That is correct. The first one, like I mentioned earlier on, is the weather. You need to have an idea of the weather, how the weather is going to be in the coming season. And you can do this from the meteorological department of your country, or you can try and access international databases. You may have to pay for those to access information. They will tell you the temperature, how it's going to be, the rainfall and its distribution. And from that, those parameters, the humidity, you can use that information to say, based on these conditions look like they are most favorable for disease X. So that already tells you that this coming season, disease X is likely to be a problem. The second thing is the presence of the pathogen itself in the environment, or the presence of its host. That's an important element in the predictions, understanding whether you are likely to have an epidemic, in the future. And here is the thing. We know that there is variability among pathogens. Even when you have a pathogen that causes Fusarium wilt there, you might have different races and different proportions of these races. So if you can understand that, then that will help you understand that there's going to be, this virulent pathogen around in the environment. Also, still on the pathogen side, the quantities. We know that for an epidemic to occur, the microbe must multiply in number. Okay, so depending on the amount of your initial inocular and the speed at which this pathogen multiplies, you can predict and figure out what is likely to happen. There's a lot more, but in the interest of time, I think I'll stop here.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Maybe I can pick
so much
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Sorry, my internet is cutting and now return. I want to make the comment of the pesticide at organic agriculture. All the pesticide is not allowed except about two. The first one, oxychlor copper, and for controlling to the downy mildew, and the other about the micronic sulfur is allowed to control the acarose and the powdery mildew and for insects. So the
Hello. Dr. Farouk, I think we can't hear
the
you.
law
You're
of
breaking.
organic agriculture there is the list of the allowed pesticide regulation. You don't hello?
Yes,
Hello?
yes, you're breaking. I don't know, Dr. Paul, if you got his question.
Yeah.
I got the, I am thankful. Thank you, Dr. Farouk. We heard the first part of your comment, which is very helpful, which mentioned the exceptions, the few pesticides that are exceptions that are allowed in general agriculture. But as you kept going
the
on,
other,
because of the poor line, we couldn't hear the other part.
okay, and the other we have the new technology mobile application for the diagnosis the diseases like hudhud in Egypt. There is making at the extension sector to help the farmers about any problems facing during the harvest seasons. This when the farmers found any problems can put in this application, mobile application, and admittedly he find the solving about how to control or how to use biological or pesticide to control that. The other, the last comment about we use also the Bacillus thuringiensis to control the worm of cotton. It is very usable and it is very effective to control it. Thank you, Doctor, for your presentation and for your comment, for answers for all questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Farouk, for those insightful comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, presenter. I don't know, Dr. Paul, if you can get questions from the chat as well. Though we've run out of time.
Hello?
Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Yes?
I already wrote my question on the chat, but I can rapidly repeat it now.
Okay, you can go ahead, Dr. Taha.
Okay,
you can ask the questions now.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. In your former kind answer for me about the factors that affect efficacy of plant extracts, you have mentioned the effect of UV. And I know because I am specialized in baculoviruses and biological control baculoviruses for controlling insects. I know that the UV affect also baculoviruses and other agents like bacteria and fungus. So in your experience, do you know how we can reduce the effect of adverse effect of the UV on biological control agents? How we can reduce the effect of UVs? You got the question?
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much for that question.
I also ask my question. Then you just answer it together, please.
Please proceed. Although we are running out of time, but please proceed.
Yeah, but it's interesting. Nobody is complaining about time today. Good.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yes. So I am wondering about the agroecological farming, right? Whether it is something that can be promoted under commercial agriculture. And also, is it feasible, in Africa where land tenure system is always a challenge? I don't know. So it is something that we need to promote, but I don't know if the factors like land and other issues can allow ecological agriculture farming. Thank you.
Thank you about that. Okay, let me start with Dr. Taha's question. It's very true. One of the big problems in biological control, of course, the first step is to identify the organism that you're going to use as a biological control agent. Okay, and for that, there is work that goes into that. We know the species that are involved, whether it's for microbes or for insects, and the development process that we need to get to them, that we know. But one of the big challenges is always the packaging, because the packaging is what determines the longevity in the field. You might have a microbe you introduce in a given area, and it doesn't last long, and therefore, it gets killed off. But I think where biological control has been effective, it has happened despite UV. The major challenge with biological control is trying to look for a microbe that is used in one location, and you want to go and use it in a different location. That is going to bring a lot of problems because you have to subject it to that new environment. Let me give an example. You might say you're trying to kill foreign, and you say, let's go and get Bavaria baumannii from, from the Americas, where it came from. It's very possible that that microbe is better adapted to that country in the Americas where you got it from. If you are going to bring it, if you are going to introduce it in Egypt, for example, or Morocco, or you're going to introduce it in Zambia, the best to do is to look from the natural, the first step would be to look from the naturally existing flora in your country. Okay, you might find, and I'm saying this from experience. We had some Bavaria baumannii which we got in a bottle that came from India. It didn't work for some reason. It was, failing to multiply. But our own Bavaria that we got from the field, we did test it, and in the laboratory so far, it's working very well. And this Bavaria was found in the natural environment here in Zambia. So it means it survived the UV here in Zambia. For us to find it in the field under the existing UV levels, it means it's a good microbe to start with. Now, I do understand that sometimes you're in a rush, and going through the process of bioprospecting to try and locate this microbe in your environment might take long when the problem is already at the door and it's destroying your maize. But the trouble is when you start putting in all these chemical compounds to try and shield your active ingredient or microbe against UV. If you are not careful, you end up, introducing the same chemicals that you're trying to avoid in the beginning. You know, microbes have got their natural way of surviving UV. If you can get those naturally existing microbes well adapted to your environment, that would be the best way to go. However, if you don't have it in your environment and you have to import something from elsewhere and you try it and it doesn't work, I could share with you the list of innate materials that people are trying now. It's still research ongoing. There's various innate materials that people are trying now. But I think for me, the best way is to bioprospect, look for a microbe that is better existed to that environment. Now, coming to the question on agroecological practices, agroecological crop production. Yes, it's being, you know, there's even a paper on this from the UN advocating for this, why it's a good way to go. But I think the comments that you've raised are also valid. These agroecological setups, they are like permanent settings. In the full execution of agroecology as a way of producing crops in integration with livestock and fisheries and other things, it's a very, it's not a temporal thing, it's a permanent setting. So you plan your systems. It's not something that you keep changing every 6 months or every year. And therefore, I understand the concern for land tenure. No one wants to invest into a system where you're planting trees and you're going to know the trees will be mixed in with the, you know, this fish pond, and then you're going to have your livestock and you have channels through which the slurry from the livestock is going to the fish pond and so on. This integration in a very natural ecosystem without destroying too much of the existing trees, that kind of setting is a very permanent setting. So it's really restricted to people that are not leasing land, people that have some land, you know, and they can pass it on to the next generation. So I agree with you. This is going to be a problem, and we have seen it, where the people that don't have land rights, especially on a long term, they are hesitant to get into it, and I understand. The same thing with the commercial agriculture. We have pressing needs. People are hungry, like right now. That's why sometimes it's even very difficult to deal with groups that are proponents of heavy use of chemical synthetic fertilizers, synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. It's because agroecology requires planning. It's not something that you implement now and next year it has dealt with all your hunger problems as a country. No, you need those systems to establish, for example, and so on. And therefore, on the short term, commercial agriculture is still very attractive because you have your monoculture and you're putting fertilizer there in the short term. I'm not an advocate for commercial agriculture. I'm simply saying when you are in a developing country and people are hungry right now, you have to have a short-term plan, and you have to have an eye also on your long-term plan. So the short-term plan, the short-term plan. So the short-term plan would be to have, unfortunately, this is reality. In the short run, we may have to embrace a few, temporarily, we may have to embrace a few elements of commercial agriculture, but in the long term, I think we need to start planning better. Thank you, moderator.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Paul, for the presentation. I don't know now, we are way beyond our time. We are supposed to stop at 12:30, so you can guide if we need to stop or we get a few more questions. The last questions.
I think we need to stop, Chair. It doesn't end.
All right, there were questions which were typed in the chat. We didn't even have a chance to read them, but it's okay. I think,
Okay.
Sorry?
You could get to the, if there are some hot pressing ones, you could get to them, moderator.
Yeah, okay. So you could have maybe dealt with them, but I'll just read them because they've been there for a while. So there's one from Ghana, Mr. Abraham, ma'am, who says, with regard to the health effects of those who consistently manage the spraying of pesticide, what are the preventive measures? That's one question. Then from Malaysia, there's also a question to say, as we know, today growers or plantation industries are more interested in monocrop planting system. Furthermore, with increase in population and modernization in machinery, how do we go about controlling pests and diseases in monocrop so that it is below economic injury, and the most important, not to rely heavily on synthetic pesticides or fungicides? Then the last one is from Malaysia, Dr. Rosetta. She says, I am interested to know more on pest resurgency. May you please elaborate more and give examples how not to create pest resurgency? Thank you. So those three, maybe you can handle them, then we close the session.
Okay, thank you, moderator. So in terms of health effects, yes, I agree with you. And again, in the short term, in the event you find yourself that you, as a country, you are requiring more time to put better methods for disease and pest management. In the event you find yourself that you have to deal with pesticides, the people that are frequently using pesticides, I'll mention two major things. Maybe three. The first is personal protective equipment. They must be fully geared in the overalls and masks and everything. You must protect the inhalation, protect the people applying the pesticide from inhaling those pesticides. You need to protect their skin. There should be no skin contact. Some of the pesticides can go through your skin, others through inhalation. And the people using the pesticides must be taught carefully, for example, that you don't eat when you are there in the field applying pesticides. They must be taught on how to choose the best times of the day to apply. You don't want when there's a lot of drift and the pesticides are going into the nearby communities. That would be something to do. And also you, to the best of your ability, start with the pesticides that are color-coded green. They are still toxic, but they are a lesser evil. I think for those who still need to use pesticides, especially protecting the people, I think that would be a good start. Now, monocrops and how to deal with it is true that especially on a commercial basis, people still love monocrops. And there is a place for monocrops, at least on a temporal basis, which is that I have said this several times. We have, in many developing countries, we have not reached a certain level of food sufficiency. The organic agriculture and the agroecology, when the systems are initiated and running properly, in the long term, okay, especially when we spread this out on large scale, they should be able to deal with, food sufficiency. But for now, when you have hungry people that want to be fed now, I think we need to have two strategies: a short-term one, while at the same time we are preaching agroecology and trying to spread out organic agriculture as much as we can. But the only thing we could do under these monocrops is just to, to take good care of the people that are applying the pesticides. Try to apply these pesticides without drift so that you are minimizing your effects on non-target. Get my words, minimizing. You can't eliminate. Every time you put a chemical in the environment, it's going to negatively affect something. But in the short term, we should try to minimize the hazards. Now, pest resurgence. Again, it's a pity we do not have a lot of time for this. Entomologists will explain to you in certain ways and so on. But if you are able to maintain ecological balances among living things, you shouldn't have an issue with pest resurgence. Pest resurgence can show up under several conditions. Sometimes you have resistance that has developed. Something never used to be a problem. A certain pest never used to be a problem. It was handled properly. But because resistance has happened, and we spoke about the use of chemicals and how resistance comes up, you will have the pest resurging. In the plant pathology, we have what we call the boom and bust cycle. And so if resistance develops, you can have resurgence. So, but on the insect side, if you can use, there's what entomologists call the FRAC code. No, FRAC code is for fungi. You know, IRAC, International Resistance Action Committee, they tell you how to alternate pesticides. If you are going to use chemical control to deal with a pest, you must be alternating. Don't use pesticides from the same with the same mode of action year in, year out. There is catalogs that are already published that list all active ingredients into different pest groups. So if you've used the pesticide from this group 1 this year, next year, if the pest shows up, use a pesticide from the different group. Okay, that helps you to prevent this resistance building up and having this resurgence. But also what I said, if you're able to maintain a diverse mix of biodiversity in the neighboring environment, you have natural enemies, you have everything in equilibrium. So you sort of try to minimize pest resurgence. Sometimes if you're using pesticide and you're killing natural enemies, there's absolutely nothing you can do. Something will resurge. We do the same thing from the pathology side. You try to use fungicides from different groups from one year to the next, so that you don't have resistance building up and having pest resurgence. Also, the type of resistant varieties, I'm not talking about GMO, genetically modified, no. I'm talking about your regular varieties, resistant varieties. You can have a tactic where you pyramid genes. You have multiple modes of resistance stacked into one variety. When you have a variety like that, it's rare to have resistance breaking down and having pest resurging. From Malaysia, it's a very broad topic. I wish we had more time to tease it out further. Over to you, moderator.
Okay, thank you very much. We have now come to the end of today's presentation. Thank you for your attention, for your engagement. We really appreciate. It's time now to close the session. We already passed the time. So tomorrow again, we continue at the same time. Thank you very much. We now have to end the session. Thank you, Dr. Paul, for your presentation as well.
Thank you for nice presentation.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Ciao.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. See you tomorrow.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.